Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023 meeting of the Elementary School Building Committee. I'll review our agenda very quickly and then we will go ahead and get started. So we'll offer an opportunity for public comment. Then we're going to have a presentation on exterior materials and site development. Then we're going to see updates to the plans for the new building. We'll get an update on the status of the traffic report and other project meetings. Then we will seek approval for an amendment to what we've approved previously around geothermal test wells and stormwater management test pits, work we can do kind of in advance of some of the some fact-finding work. And then we'll look at our Mass Save program, technical advisor proposal, and hopefully vote on that as well. Finally, review the project calendar, looking to adjourn around 8 o'clock. So we will jump right in to the public comment portion, and looking out at our audience, it seems we have no public comment at the moment. I will note, however, that we did receive an email from a citizen with several questions about the project costs, inflation, etc., following the presentation to town meeting. With the help of Perkins and Vertex, I did respond, and I will forward it out to the committee for your information. Obviously, we can't, trade emails back and forth about it, but so everyone has it. It had a lot of thoughtful questions, so it was, I think, really valuable. So with that, we will move on to one of my favorite parts of these projects is when we get to the part where the architect starts bringing like props. So it appears we have reached that stage of the process. So we're going to talk about exterior materials and site development. So Bob, am I kicking this over to you?
You can, and I will quickly, we're going to take it just slightly out of order, if that's okay. We'll start with the site development.
Sure.
So we're joined here by Ashley Iannuccelli from Traverse Landscape.
Welcome.
And she will
Thank you.
take us through the landscape.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. I've been to a couple working group meetings so far, but I don't think I've officially presented at this group. So this is also an exciting part of the development, is starting to look at the landscape and starting to better understand and program what all of those spaces could be.
Are we showing the slide?
It doesn't look like we
like it.
are.
We were.
So quickly, I can start talking through our first piece, but we have had quite a few user group meetings, and those have been hugely beneficial into understanding what the actual program of those spaces are. So I'll just highlight quickly some of the takeaways, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with the site plan and how it's been evolving and developing, but some of the biggest pieces in terms of fire and safety was the ring road. So in previous alignments, we have had the ring road outside of the play area. There's been comments for fire and safety that having that ring road closer to the building would be a much more beneficial alignment. We also understand our fire lanes need to be 20 feet. We've had a lot of discussion about fencing of the play areas and all the green spaces. And then, so the fencing is really important, especially for additional off-hour use. For playgrounds and recess, no vehicular traffic or crossing to the playgrounds. So that's been hugely important through the entire things. Lots of swings. Swings come up all the time. So we're very excited to give everyone what they're looking for. A lot of diversity in play and giving students the opportunity to play in either green space or play structures or basketball. So we need a field space to be dedicated towards recess, and this should be able to be broken up into 2 fields. Now this would be separate from the space that will be devoted to physical education. So there'll be 2 big green spaces within the site. We talked a lot about basketball courts, maybe having 2, but 1 geared to smaller students. So maybe the net could be lower, and it could even be broken up into 2 courts. And then play areas should have walking paths, flexible seating, came up quite a lot. In terms of the outdoor plaza and the entrance space, we know it needs to be inviting and welcoming, great visibility. And then there was discussion of having a community space, which was more like a student, but also a great place that parents could engage with the students in the school that's not necessarily behind the school, but located a little bit closer to the front. Again, walking paths and then outdoor seating and flexible areas that could have multi-uses. So I'm going to give you a quick recap of the site plan because I'm not sure when the last time you saw it was. Similar alignments, but we have been making some modifications. The first is tightening up that ring road. If everyone can see my cursor here, the ring road has been brought right up against the building. And the way we're doing this without creating any crossings is dedicating this to a parent drop-off, but that can be entirely monitored during the day. So that can be completely closed off and you will not have any access for vehicles during that time. This actually helps us as well because we know we need hardscape play, so this entire surface can double, which is even better. Trying to reduce pavement. Initially, we had over 260 parking spaces. We're looking at potentially reducing that, but only in the means of having enough located proximal to the school that were paved, but potentially providing overflow parking as well, so that you're not providing excess asphalt every single day, but you have the space when you need it. Looking at simplifying circulation, cleaning up some of the geometry, straighter lines, more organized drop-offs. And then Perkins Eastman has been doing a great job too of working with the building, making some modifications to the alignment to create better visibility to the parent and the car and the bus drop-offs. So currently you have your bus drop-off located in yellow along the front of the building. And then your parent loop wraps right along the building, that's shown in pink, and goes out. At the last user group meeting, there was some discussion about potentially changing that circulation and inverting it so the parents would actually go the opposite direction. Either way, they'll have plenty of stacking to get all 85 cars within the site, and that's something we're still studying if that should be inverted. In this current condition, as you see it today, there is one conflict point where cars and buses cross, and this is normal. It's going to happen at one point in the site, but that could be dealt with by signage and having a stop sign for cars. So buses would circle into the loop, and then cars would wait and then move past afterwards. So as you start to look at these landscape concepts, you're going to see that a lot of it, there's a lot of fluid gestures, a lot of really organic shapes and movements and plazas that are more nature inspired, which I think lends itself more to exploration, and it gives everything a little bit of a softness, which is really well geared for students of this age. And that's really inspired by Hopkinton and the ecology and all the natural resources, specifically water, which we're taking and aligning with this idea of the journey of learning. Go back one. So this is an enlargement of your plaza space right now. The bus loop loops right in the front. This can accommodate up to 18 buses in this loop. So we understand from our working group meetings that the buses are going to come in 2 waves, which are likely 9 buses or greater per wave. So that can accommodate that quite easily. Now the parent loop, you'll see up top, loops right around the building. You have this new parking lot here, which could be most likely staff. This would be gated so that it could have some potential access during the day. And then during drop-off hours, this loop would be open, and that gives you your stacking right around the building. And then your parent drop-off is located here right down at the bottom of the page, and you have a great connection to the main entrance. And there's actually dedicated stacking spaces for those cars. This point right here is that connection that we're still evaluating, but at the least would be signage so that parents would stop as the buses move through. A lot of great conversations about exciting things like snow removal. So you'll start to see that notated on the plans, potentially eliminating some of the islands on the sides so that snowplows can push the snow through. Also looking at creating these corners on the sides of the parking area so that we can build that into our design. And then certainly softening up these edges in this plaza space with great benches, seating, lots of playground, lots of organic, naturalized plantings, and leaning into like habitat creation and those sort of native plant palettes. Here to the left, you can see some of the recent precedents we have about just incorporating green space and creating these really undulating and organic plaza spaces. Here are some other great opportunities. Oh, quickly, I would like to back up. We talked about this community space There was reference to Little Fenway, which is currently at the school, and how people really love it. So this corner here provides a great opportunity for something like that, where we could do some sort of amphitheater seating, plaza space. It's about 1,500 square feet, so it could accommodate some parents and students and could be connected to a green space as well. And then here are some precedents that we're looking at: potentially amphitheaters, flexible bench seatings, and then really safe connections to the parking lots, which is critical. So then we start to move to the back of the site and looking at some of the outdoor classrooms and how these are all going to be connected. So the core, the campus core is highlighted here, and from there, these courtyards spill right out into the green spaces. So up top, you have your first opportunity with a plaza space off the gymnasium, and then we start to focus on these outdoor learning landscapes in the center of the building. And these start to weave their way through and bring the students into the recess areas. This is a blow up of the first classroom. You have your larger gymnasium space here, which is a great flexible space. Again, good opportunity for parents and students as well. And then you have the center courtyard space here, and that is very much dedicated to outdoor learning. So one of the comments we had after our last presentation was a simplification of the design, reducing the number of outdoor classrooms. So whereas a previous rendition maybe showed 4, we've taken that and called it down. So now you have 2 outdoor classrooms, one of which will hold about 1,000 square feet. So that'll be 1 classroom. And then you have another space which is larger that could accommodate up to 2. Again, lots of flexible seating. I think that's something we really heard, was that classes want to be outside and have tables and chairs that they can actually use and see. So this lower classroom here really lends itself well to that. And then incorporating sensory learning opportunities like some of these chalkboards and easels. And then also maybe some breakout spaces where we're showing these lawn areas where maybe you just have boulders and seating spaces. So they create nice naturalized nooks that can be breakout spaces for smaller groups. Something else that we started to get really excited about, we always talk about incorporating bioretention and native plantings in that form on the site, but we do have some spaces here that instead of programming with just lawn, we could look at habitat creation and creating these mini meadows, which are much lower maintenance, but also create great learning opportunities for the kids, incorporating pollinator species and then looking at the cycles of the plant growths and maintenance. This is a zoom of the next classroom. So initially this courtyard had been programmed with 3 outdoor classroom spaces, and what we defined after the last user group is this was a very big connection to the recess area. So now what you'll see is a really nice undulating pathway, which one of the main connections to recess, and that kids would funnel out through the space into that play. And you'll start to see some of the gestures like the blue of the paving starting to move you through. So you do have 1 small outdoor classroom here, and then there's an outdoor vegetable garden space down lower as well. Another comment we got after the last meeting was taking the outdoor classrooms and moving them a little bit further away from the building so that you do not see a disruption during school hours and when there's classes in session. We also talked a lot about vegetable gardening, how it's a great program, but sometimes it can be unused. So what we're starting to look at is creating a smaller multi-use space where maybe there's a shade structure in the middle. The vegetable gardens can be located on the perimeter, so it can really double into different spaces all the time, and you don't have a vegetable garden that's front and center if for some reason it's not used for 1 year. And then to the right, you have different precedents of seating areas, flexible outdoor classrooms, some great inspiration for a vegetable garden where you have the stump seating surrounded by tables and more learning opportunities in the center. Are there any questions on this before I start to funnel through to the recess areas?
I do have a question. Maybe this is getting into the weeds a little bit. But along the car loop, there's 2 or 3 90-degree turns, and I see some trees shown in the lower right corner there.
Oh, right here.
Yes, I'm thinking about blind
Thinking about
spots.
site distance. Well, it will be a one-way roadway, but yes, that's something we can evaluate and just shift those trees inward.
Yeah.
Any other questions in terms of the site plan?
This project will be subject to major site plan review by the planning board. And in the bylaw, they have their requirements for parking and screening. And just, you might want to, if you haven't already, look at that because it'll hang us up 6 months from now, we have to go to the planning board.
Yes, and that's something we've started to talk about because
Yeah.
trees in the parking areas are great and they're required.
Yeah.
However, there's always that conflict between snow removal and trees in the parking lot. So I think we'll be looking at that scenario to mesh those two.
All we need is a good argument. And, last time, as I recall, we developed a good argument over time, and eventually we prevailed upon the Dover Amendment and said, no, we're not doing trees, but they'll be looking for that kind of thing.
And this is a fairly large parking lot, so it's going to be important to incorporate trees as well, especially in terms of lead and getting the necessary shade in there. It's just about doing it strategically so that we make sure it's a maintainable parking lot.
It's odd that, given the current state of everybody's mind, they'd probably just soon have solar panels as trees.
What's the capacity on the car loop in terms of vehicles?
Over 85 cars. It's quite a large loop because we've now looped it all the way around the building.
That's great.
All right. So I just want to bounce back quickly. So this is where things really get fun, the recess area. So recess is going to be a combination of 3 different things. It's going to be green space, which we know is heavily used. Kids just love to run. We'll have structured play, and we'll have the basketball courts. And then what you'll see noted here in blue is the hardscape play. So that'll be hopscotch. That can be obstacle courses. And that can also be, we've created hardscape before where you actually have dots on the ground so you can organize classes and move students around like that as well. So we'll look at the first upper play area to begin with. I'm calling this the overlook. The site does have a slope to it. So this play area is located, I think, 5 or 6 feet higher than that low play area. And granted, there's quite a distance and run for that to take place, but it's a great spot to be a little bit more elevated. And I think we can play up that in the design concept, creating these structures like you see here, which is almost like a tree fort. It's a little bit more naturalized. You'll see we're getting in our agility equipment here, looking at some gymnastics equipment because we know that's something that's heavily used by the students. Lots of swings, we have heard that loud and clear. And then our basketball hoop would be located right here to the side. I would like to note that all of the play area is completely fenced. So from this point around, there'll be fencing around that entire piece. Walking paths are also really important, so we've tried really hard to connect all of these areas and surface with walking paths. Then this is the lower play area, which we're calling the basin. There is this natural dip here, which I think we can use to our advantage while maintaining AD accessibility because we know that's critical. So we're using our grade change to potentially look at maybe a sloped area where you can have climbers up that slope, play structures located on the bottom, more swings, sensory play equipment like some of these musical instruments cited here, and then also creating outdoor plaza spaces that can have benches and seating, whether that be for students or for teachers as well while they monitor the playground. And we also love the idea of integrating a lot of these native species within the playgrounds because they are large spaces, so they need to have shade and they should be really soft feeling. So I think a great piece of this as we start to look at this composition holistically is that though you have this really large play area, it can be divided into 2. So I think it gives staff a lot of flexibility on how they want to treat that and how best they can monitor it. So some of the questions we came across is, you do have this field here in the center, which is fairly large. Does that want to be treated as 2 fields or does it want to be treated as 1? And we can also start looking at, reducing that square footage as well. But I think the goal here is to create a lot of flexibility and a lot of wonderful spaces for these students to use. So any questions on recess or outdoor classrooms?
Yeah, I do. First of all, thanks for the presentation information so far. Could you elaborate a little bit on who was in the working group as far as who makes up that group that's provided some of this input
Yes,
to you?
Dan, do you want to?
Well, the first meeting we had some
We
of
had-
the staff
Right.
and PE teachers were in that group as well.
Okay.
And then the second time we met was Susan, Carol, Tim. I think that was it,
Yeah.
right?
And actually,
And Ann.
yeah,
Okay. So no
First-
members from the community. We haven't tapped into
We
some of
haven't.
those
No.
no.
groups. Okay.
And we did have a meeting with fire and safety too. So that
Yes.
was one of the first meetings.
So, and I'm not sure if one of the questions you got from that person that sent an email is, you know, you hear the word outdoor learning center and vegetable gardens and things. It sounds, you know, pretty exotic, and we're trying to watch our pennies here. I'm wondering, is there a point this evening or at some time soon that we'll have a cost associated with everything you're describing here today? And in the future, if people say, yeah, we can do this, but we can't really do that, or we want this, but we need that, are we going to be able to see it in that sort of transparency, or is it all just one price for the whole package?
And the schematic design estimate is going to break down all these items individually. So you're going to see what each one of these things is.
So we'll see the difference, as you suggested, maybe one big field instead of two small fields. There
Right.
might be a price advantage going one way or the other.
And when you start,
I mean, they're gonna price up the total plan, and they're, you know, at this conceptual schematic level, it's not overly detailed. It says this is field one, this is field two. You know, it's kind of baked into the overall number. So I know cost has been a topic that the committee keeps bringing up. I'd say now is your time to give the feedback to the design team. If you feel that what's on here is a little more than what you want to move forward in, I wouldn't move it all the way to the estimate and then wait and decide in August. You know, now is when we're going to be wrapping up the design, the month of June. That goes to the estimators in July, and then in August, you need to make decisions in a two-meeting cycle in terms of when you kind of finalize the overall number that this committee approves to then move to the other bodies. So if you feel what you see now is a little more than you want to buy, then you should put that information back to the designers now. And there's several areas that we could talk about tonight that kind of fit in that bucket.
That's just kind of hard to do without having a price tag associated. I mean, it might be a $10,000 difference or a $100,000 difference. So how do you make an informed decision on something that you don't have the details on?
No, fair question. I mean, you know, Ashley and the Traverse team has designed a beautiful campus right here, and you know, but there were areas that could be trimmed back in terms of the number of pathways, the amount of paving, the number of outdoor classrooms. You know, asking if that's the right number of 4 outdoor classrooms is a conversation we can have at this level without waiting for the numbers, right? It's a large school, it's 1,200 students. You know, certainly if you build it, you know, they can find uses for it, but, you know, are all these pockets of outdoor education the right quantity is a question I think the committee needs to come to terms with.
Is there a formulaic, you know, sites and everything makes them not created equal, but you know, it's a large school with 1,200 students, so 4 outdoor classrooms. Is that kind of based in anything, or is it just what the site allowed? I don't know, I say based in, obviously it's, I mean based in any like utilization or that kind of thing.
so we did actually start with a much greater amount. We were actually starting with 3 outdoor classrooms per courtyard, and we've actually called that back already based on some of the feedback we received that it's not likely that 3 classrooms or 4 would be out there using these spaces at the same time.
Okay.
So we've actually started to reduce that to 2 per classroom. And then again, I think there's more flexible breakout spaces, like even the seating in the lawn, which don't come with huge, they're not big ticket items, but they're really soft and totally usable spaces too that can be incorporated to give you a lot of flexibility for the outdoor learning.
Yeah, I would add, early on too, we know we have 54 classrooms total, and just the being able to assign students in recess, there could be as many as 8 classes out at any given time, if I remember correctly. So having zones that could be assigned is somewhat important.
Right. And just to clarify, I noticed on one of the slides, it's a little deceiving. So there's 4 recess fields that are combined into one. Now, I'm sorry, PE fields. This is an important distinction. 4 PE fields combined into one, and that's 400 by 260 feet. So that's 4 small fields. So that's a really nice large space, and this is something that was defined to us by staff. The smaller recess field is more in the 130 by 200 range, which is a little bit smaller and can still be divided into 2, but is not geared to be, you know, a full-size field.
So, you know, that's a low-hanging fruit, and the feedback did come from the users about separating the spaces, but, you know, the revised plan showed a sidewalk kind of as the buffer. You know, I think that could be added at a later date. It's a simple item that doesn't need to be there in terms of the sidewalk connection, kind of bifurcating that lower field. You know, it could be done at a later date with plantings, an easy tweak to make to the overall plan versus waiting for the linear footage of sidewalk estimate coming back, because you're not going to see sidewalk A, B, C. You're just going to see a total quantity of linear footage of asphalt versus concrete, and then you're gonna look to the design team for us to say, you could trim this or that if it doesn't fit within the overall picture that you guys feel comfortable going to town meeting. But if there are things that stick out to you here that you want to question, now's the time to talk about it. We can certainly talk about it again in August when we have real numbers in front of us too.
A couple follow-ups, and for Carol and Susan, could you remind me, how many students per classroom are we targeting for this school? I'm just trying to get a number.
22, 23?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
22. Okay,
So we're really talking like 150 to 175
Yeah.
kids out there.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay. And the other thing that we've seen, this beautiful landscaping is, and the equipment, is that something that's included in what we look at, or are you representing just the landscaping, the hardscaping and trees itself?
When you say equipment, are you thinking about play equipment?
Yeah, yes.
Yes, that will be part of it, and
Okay.
the surfacing underneath it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Right, so there's an upper and lower playground, and I think that they've done a great job of differentiating the play, right?
Okay.
With a 2 to 4 school, you have different abilities, right? And so I think they've done an excellent job of breaking that apart. So we'll have it as playground 1, playground 2, and you'll see that, the cost of playground equipment, like everything, is up, as is the rubber, the rubber footings that go around that for the, shock absorption. So, those will be big items, but they are serving a large school, and so we'll have isolated dollar values for the rubber surfacing as well as play equipment.
Yeah, would this look any different for a projected $150 million school instead of 175? I know it's kind of a wise-ass question, but are we designing a school to meet this number that was thrown out 6 months ago? It's going to be $175, or are we trying to get a school as efficient as possible, fit the need, and be as cheap as possible? Well, what I'm saying is, we designed all this play space and this cool stuff, which is all great, if I was over at St. Mark's. But, we don't have the finances that they have. When we go to town meeting, it's going to be incredibly important that the number is substantially less than $175. So my fear is, we throw out these numbers, we're designing the school to this projected 175 number, and sure as hell, like magic, it'll be 175. But it'll fail at town meeting. So rather than go through all this, I try to employ you to be more conservative. Maybe you are, and forgive me if you are, but we got to do better. And we'll talk more about it when we talk to exterior finishes. And then we're going to talk interior finishes. And it's going to be, this is all great stuff, but it comes at a cost. In the meantime, we got 4 walls in a room and a teacher and 1 or 2 students. And, from my perspective, we just don't want to go crazy. That's it. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I'll tell you, to follow up on Mike, because I've had a couple of comments from folks in town that they've looked at some of these preliminary drawings and they're not fortunate like we are to see this detail. And again, it looks wonderful. And they think about the current rankings of the schools, which, Carol and your team have shared, and, top 5 year after year after year. And they think, but we don't have any of these bells and whistles, and yet our students are still getting an unbelievable, great, top-notch education. Do we need to go to this level? And I guess I'm somewhat ignorant to know, and kind of where Mike was going, maybe this isn't as expensive as it looks like, but I think, to Mike's point, whether it's the forum coming up in early June or any of these other meetings, we've got to have extreme, transparent, detailed numbers, not, this is $1.3 million. They and I personally want to see a lot more detail, and you may have it, and we've kind of ruined your punchline that's coming up in 10 minutes or in 2 weeks or 5 weeks or whatever it might be. But that's some of the feedback I'm getting now, is like, we've maintained and earned this great reputation, and none of the schools have these bells and whistles. It doesn't mean they shouldn't have some of them, but the cost factor, it's going to look like, wow, this is the Taj Mahal, and it's an elementary school.
I think that I'd echo the probably, and not probably, we're definitely going to need more detailed numbers at some of these stages, I think as a group, then might be normal. So maybe we need to have a longer conversation about what that would look like. Because, again, as to sort of echo the point that's been made, the work's phenomenal. It's just that we know that right now what we've got, with the feedback we're getting in this town, is that number was sticker shock. And so at a minimum, we all need to be able to tell this story really effectively. And it might be that this is the design we go to town meeting with, and what we're able to say is, originally this had more outdoor classrooms, this is why we did this, the teachers say that this is when they're gonna be utilized, so we need this, but we're gonna need that information, and we're probably gonna need it, much like the traffic study, earlier than would normally be in the process. I think the challenge that I think we also need to be prepared to make on the other side, though, is you're right, the schools we have today didn't have all these bells and whistles, but we're also not building a school for 2027.
Yeah.
We're building a school for 2027 plus 50 years. And so, thinking about, Marathon had a lot of stuff that the schools didn't have before. And so this is a constant evolution of what the practices are in education, that we want to even be able to leap forward a little bit, so that we don't build a school that 5 years from then we're like, well, why don't we have this thing that every other school has? So it's a really difficult balance, and our job is going to be to obviously be able to confidently tell the story of whatever we end up with. And so I do think, obviously you're hearing that from us, we're going to probably need a different level of detail earlier.
I think that's an important conversation for the committee to have, and I appreciate Ashley pointing out to the fact that the working group did push back on the overall design, and we had an open conversation about reducing the amount of outdoor classroom spaces to try and find the right number. And the landscape plan is a harder one to bring dollars back because it's project specific to this exact site. The presentation you're going to see later tonight about materials on our building, there's a lot of data out there. You're going to be able to kind of pick more from a range of different materials, which come with ranges of pricing. So those types of decisions are easier for the design team to break it down for you guys in digestible bites, but the landscape package and the site estimates are kind of project specific to your specific site, and that's why that is kind of rolled into the full design estimate.
Does it make sense to just ask Peter if he can price it now? We can price it like this, and then bring it back a more detailed estimate sooner, so that everybody can see those numbers and start to talk about that, because if this is the design that we're going to start with, we might as well ask Peter if he can fit in.
Yeah, we can also talk to Peter about, cost drivers too, if there's certain elements that are, pushing it up or not.
I think that's big. I know Bill's been saying that a few times, which is like, we don't necessarily at this stage need every line item, but what are the, I was going to say big rocks, but that's a bit of a bad pun for landscaping. But like, what are those drivers? Are there 10 things that if we scale back, we scale up, they're going to make a big difference? If we're talking about, few $1,000 things, that's going to be less kind of interesting to us.
Well, and I would say we'd have to balance that with what the program needs to be at the school too. So if you're looking at 2 playgrounds here, it's designed that way because we have second graders to 4th graders, and they play much differently. And I think the space between. So I think a lot of the stuff that you're seeing are things that we requested programmatically to make sure that we're providing the school with its needs to operate. So I think 2 playgrounds is not a crazy request on their part. And the outdoor classrooms, although they look fancy and all that stuff, I think what we're talking about is low maintenance, really kind of natural learning. So it's not putting 300 desks out there or creating something. It's taking space that would otherwise just be either grass or rocks or whatever would grow between 2 buildings and doing something with it. So
I guess, yeah, that's the information we need. What is the baseline?
yeah,
What's really, really fancy? And we decide whether really, really fancy is worth it.
right.
Okay, so we need that kind of input.
Yeah.
And I start to, because it kind of like, if you visualize this almost as like a table, right, which is, and Tim, a great point, is you'd almost have the features, the baseline, the cost, and the programmatic impact. right? So yes, a second full set of recess playground is, I would imagine, a big ticket item. But the column next to it is, you're gonna have
Yeah.
150 to 175
What are you
kids
gonna
in
do
a
otherwise?
recess at once.
Yep.
You can't put them all in one field, so,
Yeah.
you know, so that's, because that is, again, it's not, I mean, we are looking to cut the cost of this project where we can to continue to make it reasonable, but I, at least speaking for myself, what I'm most looking for is when somebody comes to me and says, I saw that picture, why do you need all that outdoor space? I want to be able to say, like before tonight, and this is nobody's fault, this is just the channels we're building, I didn't know how much input came from the program, like from those working groups to say, these are the decisions that were made, and that's what we really need as we get these questions in the community, and they are coming more frequently when you run into people.
But I think that you raised a good point there, John, that we need a baseline too. You need to understand where
Right.
what's being proposed is
Exactly.
versus what would be the step below it,
Yes.
because otherwise that cost has no meaning.
Yeah.
It's great
It's
that
just a
this
cost.
playground costs this and two playgrounds cost this,
Yeah.
but you may
Relative.
need two playgrounds and there's lots of individual options within there.
Exactly.
I think another big piece, and if you start to look at cost, is the circulation is so large. So that's something we've been really dialing into, and I think we've trimmed almost an acre of pavement
At least.
off already, which has been great, but we understand we need those loops, we need that amount of staffing for cars. That being said, we're still looking at things like plaza spaces, reducing the amount of pavement, incorporating more green. So we are still kind of, this is a good time to be editing, I guess. So all this feedback's really important, as well as with the working group, to start to pull everything back and get it tighter. And I think even when we start to look at the loops, starting to tighten those up too, because there is a lot of cost built into circulation.
And cost built into circulation is, I mean, look, that's a story we can tell,
Right.
because
Yeah.
people are talking about that a lot too. It helps to know like what components of it are, that, fit into that category.
What are necessary.
Yeah.
So just as a point of reference too, we got the MSBA post occupancy report review for the marathon project, and consistently circulation came up as failed. So it is a story that we can tell that we're going to do this better.
Yeah.
And we're listening to what that post occupancy has told us.
That's a great data point.
Yeah.
Yeah. We also know that when they were building Marathon, the projected enrollment was 395, and today it's 643. So when we look at things like playground space, Mrs. DeBoe would tell you, I mean, she's got a lot of kids who can just be in a field at recess because the play structure would never accommodate the number of students in that building.
Also, I will just to point out too, in terms of conversations I'm having, I find it's a really important reference point to tell people when they talk about the cost of this school, that Marathon was built for 395 students. This is being built for 1,195.
Yes.
So, you know, so even before we get to inflation, just multiply.
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Well, this is all very good feedback and comments, and I think we're all working in the same directions in terms of kind of editing everything and getting to a really good point where we're tightening up our site plan. So we look forward to starting to start to present some of these revisions to these guys as we move forward. And then hopefully getting numbers attributed to them too, so that then we can
We'll
really
work
see
on
if
that.
maybe bridges aren't in our aren't in our future.
And thank you again. Absolutely, like awesome work. If we're, pushing back on questions, I think you understand the reasons why, and obviously the public meeting format doesn't exactly allow like agile project management, so we just kind of are able to react to these once every couple weeks. So thank you.
John, I should actually clarify that when I said 643, that was at the time that they were doing the post-occupancy study. So I think today we're really closer to 700, just to be very clear. I don't want to have numbers out in the community that are not accurate.
And just to kind of bring back the MSBA post-occupancy on Marathon, one of the things that they talked about in terms of outdoor recess and structure was not having enough shade. So as we're looking at this and being critical, that is something that also came back as not having enough shade at Marathon. So just to keep that in mind.
That's important.
Mike thinks we should just put up solar canopies for the shades.
I'm fine with that. Over the whole playground.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Ashley.
Great,
Thanks, Ashley.
you guys made my life easy.
So let me ask then, if there are some changes made, do you come back and we go through it again? It seems like we're really crunching on time here between now and the end of August. If there are changes made, how do we know about it, or how are we informed about that?
Yeah, we'll bring it back. I mean, first of all, let's try to get the numbers for it, and like get a more detailed estimate for it. Develop what we think a baseline is, so that there's some reference point, and then bring it back with that and talk about what you might want to see differently, and then have Ashley change it.
So we have 2 meetings scheduled in the month of June. We'd look to bring feedback back at the appropriate one based on the timing that they have. And then the pricing package comes out the second week of July, and so that's when we're then moving forward with the full estimating effort.
Sounds good. Well, I look forward to coming back and showing everyone a revised plan, but I think it's all tracking in the right direction. We're just tightening it up.
Thank you very
That's
much.
great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, great.
I can roll right into plan updates and exterior. Perfect. Good. Okay. Not a lot to show as far as plan updates. Again, they're so small. I'm just going to flag here on the plan. We've got a few offices, speech and reading rooms that changed location, and there was a quantity shift based on the more recent meetings. So I think we added one reading room and we split a speech room. We also took away some testing rooms. I think this was reported at the last meeting because our learning centers will be subdivided spaces now. So nothing big. The plan hasn't changed substantially. Those are really internal. I will say that based on comments that we've heard through some of the working groups and site meetings, we are taking another look. We're continuing to look at the CAF and see if we can simplify it, make sure that we're directing students into the cafeteria in a way that just naturally creates multiple lines and better serves the kitchen as far as serving. So stay tuned for that. We actually had some changes in the works, not ready for presentation, but we think we can do all this, make some improvements, and save a little bit more square footage. So we'll be back with that.
So I just want to point out a couple of things. You know, Bob's glazing over it in his modesty, but you know, in the working group, we're also pushing back on how do we make the building more efficient. And what you see on the left side of the plan there, where it overlays the prior footprints of the new one, that the cant of the wings are getting more normalized. You know, you're starting to lose some of those premiums associated with some of the angles. There's still a playfulness to about it, but it's getting to a different angle. Bob and I also talked about pushing the music room, because at one point that had kind of hung out, not aligned with the cafeteria space. And Bob's looked at that and found a way to make those more linear, to have less jogs in the building. More jogs means more corners, more cost. So the design team is responding and hearing what Bill, Mike, and John have been saying about cost, and I didn't want that to go unstated in this, because it gets glazed over for the public. They don't see. And I think this overlay showing the wing original and wing now shows you how they're responding to the challenges that are being put in front of them. And then the other thing is that you put the fire and the electric room in that front corner now. It's tucked way over on the side, but that is, front-facing corners. I just wanted to highlight that point, but your services do have to go somewhere. We can't be front-facing on every side of a building, and this makes sense to be where it is. There's lots of internal moves that happen at the kitchen meeting where we, juggled around storage space, and to Bob's point, I think there's a lot of good development in those corners, and so I just want to report that back to the committee as well.
Well, now I'll pig pile on that and say this is down, because I forgot the last time we presented this. This is already down 1,000 square feet.
Correct.
And that's with some modest program taken out, but also tightening up. So that's in the range of $750,000 or so.
Right. So that helps with the overall picture.
So is this the time to ask, what if? What if, worst case scenario, we do the best job we can, trying to get the numbers down to where we can get them, and the town says no? What happens at that point? do we have the opportunity to go back, make some
No,
adjustments?
it's done.
Yeah, this is.
You're done.
it's really-
Okay.
Yeah,
We
it's
did that
really
once
bad.
before.
Okay. So that being said, some of the things that I think could be questioned, and if they're still there, help us explain why, that we would have something called a Family Resource Center, if it's still in there.
It is not.
It's no longer.
So that's
okay.
that's the 1,000 square feet that
Oh,
has
that
come out of the
was.
building. Yep.
And the book room, is that no longer there as well?
The book room is in the plan, and that's required for level reading
Okay,
materials.
okay. So is there anything there other than the classrooms themselves that might stand out, like, what is that?
Well, I can answer.
You can go ahead.
There is no extra program. The program is based on the educational plan,
Right.
which the MSBA requires us to meet. The place to look for cuts would be white space, where you see circulation, large areas. What we're trying to balance is the volume of students that are moving through the school and making sure that we're not creating a false sense that hallways and gathering spaces are adequate. We want to make sure, we think we're at the right space here. We are at or a hairline below the net to gross factor that the MSBA limits schools to. But that would be the way, and the cafeteria changes that I'm talking about actually nip a little bit of the white space, so we're hoping to save some square footage by doing that. But there's not a lot, we have to meet the program. It might be useful to understand that the angle of those classroom wings, actually, because they pitch in, the southernmost and the northernmost wings pitch in, it actually saves some square footage because you're using the geometry to shorten what would otherwise be longer shared space. So there is some benefit to that. There's kind of a balance. I'm not sure if there's other things that.
No, that's a good point. I mean, we've pushed with Perkins early on to try and tighten up that white space, the corridor. When you see the white space in the classroom academic wings, it's serving double duty as an educational breakout. But it's that little white connector between the three wings where, if you go back to even January when he presented the plans, you'll see it's tightened up a lot, all right, to really kind of pull that in. And that's the kind of the free space that saves us money overall now by not needing to heat it and cool it and build it. And so Dan's looking at ways and Bob's looking at ways to try and tighten that up overall.
Well, I know our last meeting, we didn't have a chance to get into the detail, but one of the attachments we had was the responses to the MSBA as far as some of the areas were over square footage, what they recommended, and gave answers. That being said, is there any area there that could be addressed? And maybe not more importantly, but as importantly, what is the square footage now based on the couple of reductions that you have done?
I don't have that number handy. I can look it up. The MSBA's comments that were overage
Yeah.
is actually standard responses to anything that doesn't default to their calculations. Their calculations are not what is necessary for Hopkinton.
Okay.
So one example is they require STE spaces, science, technology, and engineering. In their space summary, it's a 0 because they defer to their written guidelines for you to calculate the spaces you need. So their response is you've exceeded the STE guidelines when in fact you're meeting the requirements. The gym, well, in this case, no, the gymnasium is another where they default to a 6,000 square foot space, whether you have 100 students or 1,000 students in a school. And so we calculate the number of PE teaching stations that, or the sections that you can have scheduled within the number of available periods, and we determine you need 4 stations, so that's 12,000.
The gym they agreed to pay for because it meets the needs of the program, but it is an area you could trim the square footage a little. If you look at the image on the screen, you see the overlay of 2 side courts and a full court with the bleachers on one side, but there's an overrun on the left side of the screen because I think we have a climbing wall over there.
Yeah.
But so their abilities to take slivers out of buildings, if the direction is make it as tight as possible, you can take a 2-foot sliver out of the gym and there's just less space for parents to congregate, for the game. Or you can keep that 2 feet in there and you have a little more breathing room. It's an example where that one specifically is not critical to the educational program needs, but certainly is more comfortable for the occupants that are there on a weekly basis, observing what goes on in that gym.
And that's a great example too, though, of the challenges in kind of this value engineering, because what you were just describing about the gym gave me a flashback to Marathon, and the one thing negative, other than the building's too small, that I hear from people who use Marathon are the parents whose kids have basketball there on the weekends. Why does the gym have nowhere to watch? And they don't appreciate me telling the lengthy story of how we cut space in the gym to put more space into I think it was the cafeteria to fit more kids. Yeah, so that's what we always have to consider is, like, that type of move might save us some money, but is there value in having a more expansively usable gym for the community when we go to town meeting? Because I'm sure somebody's going to stand up at town meeting and talk about the Marathon gym.
Of course they are. Correct me if I'm wrong, the family resource room at Marathon is now a classroom.
It's a special education classroom.
Yeah, so by having something like that, it gives you additional flexibility, assuming.
They took it out, though. I mean, it's gone.
I'm just saying, I'm trying to explain to you that it's not necessarily a bad thing to have that for 5 years from now when we have 100 more kids than we thought we were going to have. Oh, we'll put them in the family resource room. It was, as I recall, it was kind of a deal that the MSBA would allow this, and with a blink and a nod, we said, yeah, we'll do this, and we'll call it that. And as it turned out, we needed it for a classroom. We didn't have to put it, well, subsequently we put an addition on, but that's what it worked out. But we had that space. And all of this is 4 walls and a ceiling and a refrigerator. That's what the crap is. But it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Any more questions on plan? I'll move to exterior.
I think we're good.
So just to remind, I've just got the kind of the sketchy images of how we've taken the front of the building and tried to scale it. We talked previously about really the color and the feel of the materials, so that you see a lighter color for the 3rd story, which becomes the classroom wings in the back. And then we have scaled elements in front. We have a base on the building to help break down the scale. We have some clear story in select locations like the gym and the cafeteria to bring down the mass visually, and then we have the front canopy, which does go from gym to cafeteria to also help break down the scale. This is a different view that just kind of shows roughly the windows. What we're working on now is we're running studies to understand the minimal amount of window that we can put on the school that is most effective. So there are measures for daylight and for views that we're responding to. I think in the end what you'll find is this will be a much more efficient building than you're used to. Typical schools run closer to 40%, 35 to 40% exterior glass. We're targeting 25% on the school, but very effective use of glass. We're also trying to minimize where we can east-west exposure, maximize north-south for effectiveness.
Do you have, so I'm just, again, thinking ahead. Do you, when you say effectiveness, so if we said to somebody we went from 35 or 40% glass to 24% glass, like, do you have measures of effectiveness?
Yeah, there's daylight autonomy is one measure. Glare is another one. So actually I can point it out on here. We're looking at the classroom wing. You can see the lighter materials from the 3rd floor carry down. That's intentional. We think it, no matter what the material is, if it's a lighter color, it will help with the daylight in the courtyards as well and feel lighter. The window pattern that you see here, if I trace it, is this is one classroom bay right here. The windows hug the kind of corner walls of the classroom, and then there might be some clear story up toward the ceiling. And by doing that, the daylight that does come in reflects off of the ceiling, reflects off of sidewalls or is ambient off of those surfaces. And so it provides a more even daylight. It maximizes the daylight. Things like daylight shelves can be incorporated or not, but they can help bounce light. The idea is that that can also be effective, even on a cloudy day, to then save the costs of how many light fixtures you might need, and those light fixtures also sensing that daylight, turning off, and so you're running less energy at the same time. So the daylight autonomy, as I understand it, is the contrast between where sunlight may be more direct in a room and what might be the shadowed areas of a classroom. So there are measures to make sure that there's not a big discrepancy between those, that there's enough kind of ambient light, that there aren't dark spots as well as overly bright spots within a room.
Okay, that's helpful.
So these aren't new images, but they're kind of a look around the building. I wanted to break down and talk about options, and these aren't all the materials that are available, but this is what we see as a palette that is used frequently and reliably, or we've seen more of. So we have base materials, kind of the body of the building, and then what might be the upper portions. So for the base materials, stone or simulated stone is something that you see. It's certainly highly durable. It's much more expensive than using brick or CMU, which is concrete masonry units. The simulated stone that we show here, or the stone or simulated stone, was seen on Clyde Brown. The base of that school was simulated stone. It's a product, I think, that was Ariscraft. It's also known as calcium silicate. It's got kind of more of a refined look, but it does come at a cost. So we would suggest if these are used, maybe they're used frugally and not, completely around the building. Brick is a great option too. Brick comes in a lot of different sizes, shapes, and colors, and can be used adequately for to distinguish between the base of the building. And then CMU, there's ground face CMU and split face CMU. Ground face is, and I guess I should probably do this. I don't know if folks want to handle materials, but this is an example of ground face CMU, and it comes in a variety of colors. You can go all the way to a white and all the way to a dark color. It's smooth. A split face would be more of a jagged feel, and I believe the Marathon School is ground face. Two different colors of ground face, so it's not the, I can pass them around.
You can pass them around, Bob.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, sure.
So they come, ground face CMU, split face CMU comes like a big cinder block, basically. It's a larger unit, and one of the reasons why it's more economical. Brick also, I didn't bring brick. Everybody's familiar with brick, but brick comes in a lot of different sizes. There are the common brick that we used to. There's jumbo brick. There are longer bricks that are also used. Sometimes the trick with brick is to get a larger unit, but you still stay within the realm of a mason can use one hand to lay the brick so that you're not increasing the labor. And then stone, of course, the simulated stone can come like large units, like big concrete blocks, but it looks a little bit like stone. This is also, this is the calcium silicate. So, my personal suggestion would be on something like this, I think it's a nice material, but I'm not sure it's worth the extra cost. It's a little too close to the concrete masonry unit. Again, they can come in a lot of different colors. Calcium silicate can also simulate stone. They have colors that can do that. So with each one of these, what I'm going to run through is some detail about durability, cost, maintenance, and life cycle. And then you'll see we put some palettes together and ran some numbers to say, okay, well, if we did the building this way, what does it cost? What does it look like? As you would expect with all masonry, the maintenance is considered medium. It does have grout joints, so there is repointing that's required over time. There's power washing, but it's considered medium, has a very long life. 50 to 75 years. The simulated stone we saw on the Zervis, for those that went on the tours, the Zervis Elementary School had some of the simulated stone. It was actually Ariscraft that was simulating the stone look on parts of that building. The bottom picture here is the Mount Greylock Regional School out in Williams, Mass. That's actual real stone. And one of the things that was important to that community was they really wanted it to reflect the local materials, and it was in the mountains. And so we used very limited amount. It was really just kind of the front of the building here, the piers, and then it was used in the landscape.
You may recognize it from Easton. It's the same stone that's in the base of Easton for those who went on the tour.
A brick base. These are just some images you can see on the left-hand side, just classic red brick. Also for the Bancroft School, not a school we toured, but just showing the brick. And then the concrete masonry units. So the Marathon School uses a couple different colors, looks for the masonry on that. The base of the building, the Frederick Douglass Elementary School on the bottom, looks like it's done with a kind of a beige concrete masonry unit.
What would be the driver on the masonry unit you're talking about? The difference in the 50% difference from 30 to 45. What would drive that to be the higher end?
We didn't want to put an exact number. We have a range in here on purpose.
Okay.
The cost data.
It does vary depending on the colors and the finishes that you pick. So
Okay.
there's like a basic piece, almost like from a brick perspective, a red brick
Yeah.
that you see everywhere is less expensive than a jumbo brick or a longer brick or a brick that's flashed or a different color.
And there's
Like
also
even in these samples here, this has a polish, that finish of this is different than the other sample.
and then so for the exterior, the primary facade, there are a number of things that we see used. We see actually a return to brick. There was for a while, the old brick cavity wall was pretty standard, especially for schools. And then lighter materials started showing up on the scene in a lot of variety, I think early on to save money, but also to create a different look. So one of the things that was started to be used on a lot of schools was things like, in addition to brick, these are high-density laminate panels. So this is part of what would be considered a more modern exterior wall as far as how it breathes and allows moisture to evaporate from it. So cavity walls with brick could sometimes create problems because moisture would get trapped in them. So there's effort to weep what the cavity is behind the brick. There can be problems over time. So a rain screen wall is something that's a little bit more open. So air can actually circulate whatever the material is on the outside, and then all your insulation is behind the moisture barrier and everything. So it's more high performance from that point of view. So these are just some examples. The high density laminate is considered virtually indestructible. It's in a way relatively newer. It used to be a cost savings, but we've seen that the cost of these have gone up more significantly. So you can see here that's like $85 to $95 a square foot.
So you said it's virtually indestructible, but it's marked as medium on durability.
So medium, that's actually classifying, I guess, the fiber cement and the high density laminate
Okay.
panel.
It's a higher, that product would be a high. The fiber cement's a little bit lower.
The other product that's listed with it is the fiber cement. So this just shows really the color range, but these are basically a cement with fiberglass reinforcement in them. Also quite durable. They're used in a similar type of rain screen system, so you're not laying it as a stacked product, but it's a veneer on the exterior. And the last one is metal panel. We see this showing up in schools, sometimes just in very small amounts, but sometimes more significantly. Metal panel doesn't have as long of a life. It's about 30 years versus the 40 or 50 for some of the other products. Again, it used to be an economical alternative. It's gone up more significantly in price. It's a lot of times you won't realize it, but it's on schools, at least in a small amount. The Clyde Brown School, for example, does have some metal. It's not like a corrugated or a profiled metal. It's more of a straight metal that occurs within some of the window areas. I'm not sure if Marathon has maybe very, very limited amount.
Just above the kernel.
Yeah. So brick, these are just some examples showing very different colors and kind of textures that are done with brick. The Dunbar High School, as well as Charter Oak. You can see the use of different colors can create quite a different look for the material. The high-density laminate is on the picture on the right-hand side, so it's got a wood look. The Essex Technical School is also done in this, and that was done at a time when this was actually a substantial savings. Fiber cement, you can see on the left-hand side, that's on a school that we did in DC, the John Lewis Elementary, as well as other examples. And then the metal panel, you can see sometimes that's used for selectively on some of the school products. So the bottom picture shows the end wall there is done in a metal profile. The Excel Academy, which is in East Boston, is shown here with some colorful look at the metal veneer. So what we wanted to do then is run through a few examples. I have 4 kind of scenarios, and we can respond to whatever the thinking is. This first one says, okay, let's do it all in masonry, basically. Pretty much all masonry. The only bit of metal that's used in this scenario is in between the window systems, because it might not make sense to carry brick and then carry the steel lintel that supports the brick just for that little bit of space between floors where there's a window system. But this uses a lighter brick for that upper level, a darker brick or a blend maybe for the body of the building. And then here I showed the simulated stone as the base. This is the palette that we saw at the Clyde Brown School. And so we've tallied up the square footage, and that lands at about 3.1 to 3.8 million. The next study, and this one's highly durable, medium maintenance, kind of what you might call the more traditional approach on the veneer. Study 2 was a look at maybe using actually lighter materials like the fiber cement or the high-density laminate. In this case, using it for the body of the building, not the base, where that wood look would have the most impact. Maybe going to fiber cement for the upper level, just a lighter color, and then using to maybe compensate for those increased costs using just CMU as a base. But in the end, this one runs 4.2 to 5 million, so $1 million more than the first scenario that we just looked at. The palette 3 would be the one that, maybe just from a pure design point of view, might be a preference, at least on the architectural side. It uses the fiber cement, a lighter material for that 3rd floor, and then Okoskin, which is a version of fiber cement that has more of a natural wood look to it, for down at the body of the building, something trying to relate very much to the natural setting, and then tries to compensate a bit with just less expensive brick for the base, but something that's maybe a different type of brick that feels like a little bit closer to stone. This one also comes in 4.5 to 5.1 million, so $1 million more than that first option. And then because we were looking at these materials and we were trying to find the right balance, we came up with a 4th option. This one was pretty late, but it basically says pretty much all masonry, but just using a little bit of stone only for kind of the front kind of base of the building where everybody comes and goes. That might also allow some of the stone to be used in the landscape, so the building and the landscape might merge a little bit nicer together. There is some stone, I don't know if it was original over at the Marathon School as far as seat walls in the landscape.
No, those are precast. Actually, we built those off-site.
It's a stone look of precast?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
They're actual rocks, like, but you cast it off-site.
Got it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you have a middle and you made it and brought it
Yeah.
in as a block.
Yeah, so those are actually a nice impact, so this would be a way to, maybe there's something we can look at there for this. So it's a very limited use of the stone, but predominantly brick, and then very limited use of that high-density laminate panel, again, just between the windows, because we don't want to add masonry. This one actually comes in at the cheapest, and the reason it does is to, from the first option, which had the calcium silicate or the simulated stone base, this one goes to the mix of actual stone, but then predominantly CMU for the base around the building. So these are just exercises to explore, but you can see, even just looking at the materials where, we may have wanted to look to create a natural feel. It's $1 million more. Don't really think that would be where you'd want to spend the money. We heard plenty about more of a traditional look, and certainly the maintenance and the durability, so happy to take thoughts, and there's no vote or anything on this, but we do hope that when we come back for the next meeting, that we can get some direction as far as what goes into that schematic estimate. It can always be, again, looked at from a value engineering point of view later, but
Just a note about when it has on the earlier slides, it says periodic resealing. That means the sealants themselves at the perimeters of the windows, control joints, and those, not like a sealant that's applied to the whole surface of the building.
So I cheated, I looked at the next slide. It's the Clyde Brown Elementary School.
I was going to put it in for reference. I didn't know
Okay.
if not everybody got to see the school.
So what does that most replicate of the four options?
Option one.
Option one.
It's we took option. We heard a lot of great comments and interest in the colors and the feel of this, and so we started with that as the palette. And it's also a project that obviously Vertex worked on, is familiar with.
Yeah, so the left side of the image is the two different bricks. The tan was on the lower level and the red brick on the upper level. In the foreground, just beyond the columns, straight at the front, is that Aris Craft brick, which is that sample that Bob passed around. And then at the very top is actually a sloped metal roof, and then that leads up to that metal panel over the windows just below where it says the Clyde Brown Elementary School. So there's actually a pop-up there with, you can't see the windows from this angle, but there's windows there, and then there's metal panel above and below the window. So this had that kind of combination of a few different materials.
Is that MCM above it versus regular metal panel? Like, it looks like it's not corrugated. It looks like it might be.
No, it's not corrugated.
No, yeah, it was composite metal.
Yeah, so the composite metal product is actually expensive versus the other. It's a one on the higher end.
Yeah, we only used it sparingly. in this project,
Usually
yeah.
use very little.
The difference is whether you use it in a sheet or you use it as formed, usually.
So the brick is individual bricks, or it's not sheets, or?
Just brick.
No, the
bricks.
brick in New England has still held that it is the least expensive material to build out of from here.
Sometimes we go with a jumbo brick, like Dan or Bob said, as long as it's not oversized, one guy still lays it up, it's actually more economical. You can kind of go a little faster around the building.
So there's not any stone on the Clyde Brown?
Only at the water table, which doesn't show at this level, but the Aris Craft, which is the manufactured stone, if you bury that in the water table, it will disintegrate over time because of the freeze thaw of it. So we actually buried a natural stone at the actual where the ground plane met the building, and then we went up. So at different sides, you could see the natural stone, but very little.
Yeah, from my personal opinion on a design point of view, the Aris Craft, which is calcium silicate, also referred to maybe as a simulated stone, material of many names. It didn't seem to me that the color or the choice there necessarily provided that big of a difference. And that's where I would say maybe a limited amount of real stone or something more simulated, but then go to a masonry block for the rest of the base. It wouldn't look that much different than this. But you'd be dressing up the building a little bit in the front.
So just because it's on the image, those two stone walls that are there were the same product we used at Marathon that Chris and I brought over to this job, where it was actually manufactured off-site. Like the middle's almost like a foam, and then you clad it with stones, and it gets created in segments off-site, and you just drop it in place. And you're not paying prevailing wage of having a mason come on site and actually replicate it. You're cheap labor off-site and then the crane on-site. So if you do it sparingly in these little segments, it's much more economical. If you were doing a long run, you would field build it there. But it's another way to try and get a cost-plus product without, sparingly, and kind of dress up the front entrance.
I didn't know you guys came with stone walls. Traveling.
So where we're at in the process, just to fast forward to what we were going to cover at the end, we're looking to get comments from the committee tonight, and the team from Perkins will be back on the 13th when we come back to you. And at that time, we would be looking for direction on what level of finish we should include in the estimate for what goes forward.
Is there anything else, combinations we should look at?
Or are there any you didn't like at all?
That's a good one too. Yeah, we like those too.
I don't think when we were looking, I don't think we liked the faux or real wood. I think there were some schools that had posts that were covered in what looked like wood, and I don't think we loved that. We really did, of all the different schools we saw, we really liked the color and the textures on this. But we didn't like the wood fencing that they put with it.
This one actually, one of the comments was overhead in this canopy was this material. This actually is, it's not a real wood, but it's used, it's durable for, as far as weather resistance, for the underside. And I think the color specifically was something that was...
Yeah, it warms up the front entry, and it was used there kind of, as a punch when you first walk in the door, kind of a little bit of a richness as you walk in. And if you use that sparingly, you can really kind of get it to pop.
I think we liked that.
Yeah,
the first school we went to had the same, but a different color.
Different color.
And we didn't like that color.
It's like that color.
Yeah, the underside of Clyde Brown's entry canopy and the, when you walk into the atrium, right through the front doors, that high ceiling that was slats, are both that wood look, but they're actually a metal product.
Yeah.
We liked that under the ceiling work.
It seems to me from looking at what we got, CMU and brick are probably the most versatile and cost-effective of all the materials. So could you come up with a design that used CMU and brick, or all CMU? The reason I throw this out is when we were having this discussion with Marathon, all of our other schools were brick. They were all red brick. We all went, schools are supposed to be red brick. And as Jeff pointed out a couple meetings ago, it got expensive, the red brick. That's why we went to the CMU, which I think looks lovely. Not to copy what's there, but given the materials, the stone at $80 or $100 a square foot is expensive, especially when you get CMU and brick at $30 to $47. Is there a way, either utilizing different colors or whatever? I can't see us using any of those materials for the facade other than brick or CMU, at least personally. Again, it's driven by cost. But you guys are the architect. You can take stuff and make it look good. I don't know how everybody else thinks about this stuff, but I'm looking at the numbers. I'm still thinking about town meeting. I want a good-looking building. I want it to last just as long as all the other stuff, and CMU will last as long as brick. And all of it will last longer than the stone by the looks of it. The metal, we have metal panels on the high school, just decorative on the corners and whatever. So, I don't have a problem with that between windows, but given the fact that from what you say, what you've shown us, CMU, will last, it's most serviceable, brick is the same. Why can't we do something to, I love the fact that the accent thing, but, it's just another expense, and I wonder whether it's worth it, that's all.
Yeah,
I don't know, what does everybody else think? Open your mouth, tell these guys.
Are there any schools that you've done recently with just those two materials,
Two materials being,
the brick and the CMU, exclusively? Well, maybe not at 99%, if you will, leave a little bit for an accent.
we have plenty of brick buildings, predominantly brick, some with a CMU base on them. But not all concrete block, not all CMU.
Right, Marathon was the last school that we ever did, and the only one I can remember where it was all CMU, and that was driven by cost, and it was post-town meeting vote when the costs were spiking up on other areas of the project, and that was viewed as a way to get it back. I'll say the difference between this project and that is when you get up to a 3-story in a larger school, you do want to break up the massing, and I think changing the material, not just the color of the material, but the material products, I think will give them a much better feel to the building than using the same material just in different colors throughout. So I do think you want to give the architects the lateral ability to introduce different materials, to make different elements read and view differently from the public.
I absolutely agree. I just personally don't see the need to throw the stone in there. The bottom, all that part could be brick, just like all the other conventional schools that we think of. The CMU, just the way it is, the lighter color. Use the metal panels, between the windows like you were talking about, but I don't know.
I mean, the stone in this design, I sort of agree with you, and my first reaction was I would be interested to see a CMU, all CMU and brick, but also realistically here, the stone is used for what, 9,500 square feet in this design? I mean,
Yeah.
that is a $500,000 difference between, if I'm doing that math right, between that stone and the CMU at the low end. Doing that math right?
Yeah, and
Well,
this,
10,000.
the other thing we can play with here is heights and how much stuff is used. You can see here the stone actually goes up pretty high on the gym. That's a pretty big box, so it doesn't have to. We just tried to keep it consistent from one to the other, just as a first cut of cost comparison. This one actually, this study actually has the majority of the building as the CMU base and then brick. The other thing that maybe is worth noting, where the CMU is 30 to 45 and the brick is 38 to 47, really there's an overlap there, and there are brick, and I don't think this represents the cost of kind of a jumbo, or there's a Norman brick, which is also a jumbo, but it's just more elegant in its shape. And that might actually get right down to the CMU, but the scale of the material is maybe more appropriate for, I would say, for the younger, for small children, or for the scale of this building as well, to help break it down.
Well, if you had red brick and looking at exterior materials study 4, in the red shaded areas, primarily the first floor, part of the second floor, pretty much the whole gym, and did all that in red brick and did the rest in CMU.
Yeah, I could.
I don't see that the stone adds a lot. It's like 3 foot high, it's underneath the windows, it's underneath the portico. I definitely don't think it adds anything on the front of the gym. Just my 2 cents. I don't think it's worth the cost or the maintenance.
So that's something we can see.
We can run a scenario. Yep.
Thank you.
No, I think I'm in agreement. This goes back to what function does it serve versus cost.
Keeps the water right.
Right. So it looks good, but is it worth?
It looks good.
Yeah. But is it worth the spend? So.
One thing you can consider is, targeted approach. Where the stone really has an advantage is it has more of a tactile feel to it. And when you're thinking about the scale of this building and, a 7, 8, 9-year-old walking up to this building, seeing something that, that they can have a tactile feel on it, especially at the base of the building, at the entrances, at the benches, those types of things can make the building more attainable. Like you can walk up and you can touch it, you can understand how it's made, whereas a more blocky appearance that comes with CMU may not have that same texture. And that can really be a way that kids relate to a building, when, especially at entrances, especially at the back of the building where they're coming and going on a regular basis. That's usually why those get architectural highlights. It isn't because architects love to make things fancy. It's those are the touch points of a building.
Yeah,
I do agree. I do agree that sort of, my initial thought in looking at these, because of the Marathon experience, was looking for one that was almost an all CMU kind of model, but given the size of this building,
Yeah.
I think we can't do what we did with Marathon in terms, it would just look like an institution that would be intimidating. But yeah, I mean, I think you've kind of got where we're coming from at this point, right?
yeah.
I did want to point out one thing, because, we talk daily, right? And so things evolve more on our end than sometimes we bring it back. And so on the image in front of you, I had asked Bob to look at an outdoor classroom terrace, based on a few other schools have done that. That was a conversation that came up on Marathon, with the previous chair was really pushing that. They chose not to do the outdoor terrace classroom on that building. Some other projects we've done it recently at the Natick High School or Natick Middle School, and the elementary school we're going to open up in Ashland has one as well. So the image that you see in front of you here has an outdoor terrace classroom. It's the roof of the library. It's directly off the STEM and art room, so the two programs that would most likely use outdoor space for their particular functions. So I just wanted to put that out there. We can isolate it as a cost because you're building the roof anyway, so the premium is the fact that we would have a railing around it and that we would have pavers as the surface on top of the roof. And so it's an easy one to price up and bring back to you at that August time frame, but I wanted to point that out because it's something that we've kind of evolved in the design but didn't make you guys aware of as a full body.
Where would that be? I'm not quite sure I understand.
So show them the image first and then go back to that.
Oh, sorry.
Either way, yeah.
It's right here, so above part of the library, basically, that doesn't go up, have program above it, so it's this space right here.
So it's a long linear bar, but enough to handle
Yep.
maybe 2 classrooms at a time in terms of kids, or maybe 1. But it's off the types of spaces that would use that or activate that, being the art and the STEM. But again, it's a question we haven't really delved into too deep with the educators, but we wanted to see whether it worked and fit. And Bob's done a nice job of that, but it's an option, essentially.
Yep.
I think leaving it as a line item probably makes sense, because I think you can see the value in it, but the question is it gonna be worth it?
It's a good thing, good spot to be out
Yeah.
if we feel like the cost is
Yeah,
too high.
I do remember that on Marathon, we carried that one pretty far down the road until we finally decided it wasn't worth the expense. Okay, awesome.
If there aren't any more questions, we can keep moving.
So I'll hit on the traffic report status first. We will have a 95% draft of the traffic report by Friday, which will circulate to everybody. And then any questions on that should come back to Jeff and Chris, and they'll get them to us, and we'll get them to Vinod. Vinod will be at the community forum, and he will also attend in between. He'll attend the Thursday afternoon meeting with the working group.
So that's important because the draft comes out and we'll distribute it in between meetings to this body. But we won't meet as a body again before the community forum. And so we know it's been a hot button topic in town. So if you do have any feedback or questions on the traffic report, funnel it back to John, Chris, and myself, and we'll try and get answers back to the committee. But we'll be presenting it to the public before we can really kick the tires. But it's a recording of what he has observed. So it's not, a fluid type document where we're going to sculpt it or change it, but we can ask questions and certainly understand what the assumptions and recommendations are in terms of access to and from the site, because that'll be the big differentiator. We talked about on campus, but this will also address the off-campus intersections of Marathon driveway and the driveway at 147. And so there'll be interesting parts about that we'll need to discuss.
Okay, so
I'm sort of obligated here just to reiterate, though, if you have questions when you get the report, send them back through Jeff and Chris and Dan and Bob. So don't hit reply all, because we will not have the opportunity to discuss these in an open meeting before.
Do you
So-
want to be copied though too, as the chair, or no?
Yes.
You can be.
Yes.
We can't,
yeah,
we can't,
yeah,
we
so
can't
co-
entertain
right, so
dialogue,
copy-
but as the
yeah,
chair,
right,
you can
right.
receive
I
the
can
comments
receive
back.
them, yeah, so, yep, but yeah, we just want to make sure that we're not having a dialogue where if people hit reply all, it could be, oh, and building on this person's question, then we get into murky territory, so. Any
Okay.
questions about that, otherwise, timeline-wise? Okay. We're all excited for the traffic report.
It's going to be a riveting read.
Yeah, really. Well, it's going to be a more riveting read than most traffic reports are probably for this group.
Lots of diagrams.
Yeah.
We also had a meeting on fire protection, fire alarm, plumbing, and emergency generator. We put all those in one meeting because they're all reasonably small topics.
And somewhat related.
And somewhat related. From a fire protection and fire alarm standpoint, the big takeaway is, one of the biggest is that we would, as we would expect, the town's going to use Code Red as the third-party reviewer when the drawings come out. The only thing that we saw as a potential issue is there are some items, specifically the size of the tank the storage tank, and the interconnection of the systems over the zones for the fire protection, that were the fire department wanted to push to the third-party reviewer. So those will have cost implications. So we wonder if we might be able to get at least some time from the third-party reviewer to look at these two issues and render some advice to them, because the difference in tank size is 10,000 gallons on site to 30,000 to something else, depending on how you interpret what you're needing to fight as far as a fire. So it goes, I think it goes from building to a functioning building, then it goes to the building and the outside, and then it goes to the whole site.
Yeah.
That's the 3 tiers.
And so the third-party reviewer is new to the town starting this year. The previous one has retired, so it can't go by what the assumptions were on Marathon. So we would like to work with the building department to request they review it, and wanted to make the committee aware that there'd be some upfront costs associated with that to be determined.
From that meeting also, at least from a fire protection and fire alarm standpoint, the fire department felt okay to use the same entrance as the police department as the secondary, which is the north entrance adjacent to the gym, which is good because all those things will be at that one spot, that secondary entrance. And then we talked about the sprinkler system being a fully wet system with no dry systems involved, and only pre-action systems at IDF and MDF to protect that equipment. From a plumbing standpoint, we just reviewed the plumbing fixture schedule that went through all the fixtures and made sure that they work for everybody, or for Tim and his group. As a number, and from the emergency generator standpoint, it's going to be a diesel-fired generator. We confirmed that that does not impact the net zero aspirations, that it won't be held against us to have a fuel source. And we developed a list of the systems and items that will be on the generator. Our engineer is going to go back and look at what that means. So one of the things we want to go back and look at all the things that we're asking to be put on it. What size generator is that? And is there a threshold now? Because generators get to a certain size and they become extremely expensive. So we want to try to manage the size of it to make sure we get we don't want to provide an enormous generator because of one thing on this list pushing us over. So that's the wrap up of that meeting.
We did cover the life safety, obviously, and then like kitchen refrigeration. And I think MDF might have been
MDF,
like
IDF
three
was one of the
big things,
requests. Some outlets in the gym, outlets in the administrative suite, outlets in the media center if we can, just selected. And then there was a few other items that were pumps for the geothermal system to keep the water circulating during the.
Yeah.
So mostly there wasn't anything that was outside of what we've been asked for before. I mean, the one place I could see us maybe cutting back would be the outlets in those spaces. We also had a kitchen and courtyard meeting. From the kitchen meeting, we looked at the layout, the equipment and the layout. We've taken some of you don't see them in the plan yet, but there's some revisions that are coming because of those conversations about how the dish return and how the kids are going to stack up in there and how that all works. And we're going to try to make that work a little bit better as well as the deliveries themselves, where the dry storage is versus where the deliveries come in. We're trying to put those things together so they're not so far apart. We reviewed the circulation, looked at those potential improvements, and there was a request for a small break area to be carved out, which means the mop area flipped into the custodial area, so a little area was carved out to be able to have a little break area in there. From the courtyards meeting, just from the architectural standpoint, because Ashley was here earlier, there was a request to look at adding a single user outdoor accessible bathroom because of the locations of those rear fields and those rear playgrounds. The nearest bathroom, that you'd have to go all the way back into the building and all the way into the front area, which seemed like a very long walk. So there was a request of, can we maybe squeeze a bathroom in the back there and we think maybe under the stair in the center wing, under the landing possibly, can put a bathroom there, try to pick up that need.
And you'd access it only from the
outside. Exterior.
Yeah.
Yeah. We talked about the district working on a lesson plan for those outdoor learning spaces to better support how they, going back to the conversation earlier, do you need these? So there was a question about conversation about let's work on developing a lesson plan to support for those spaces. We've shifted the store, I think that our drawing does show, we shifted some of the gym storage areas, so there's a double door exit from the gym right out onto the front of the building for dismissal. And the request to add user operable hose bibs in the courtyards for the outdoor learning support, and that's a lesson from Easton that we didn't have that. And then those courtyards, they have to get a key, meaning the janitor, the staff has to go give them the key to open the hose bibs out there, which is not super convenient for the teaching environment, waiting for someone to come give you the key. And today we had IT, second meeting with IT and data group. I'll have notes from that one for our next meeting. Where are we now? Oh, amendments.
So, let me come over and steal the HDMI for a second. So we talked last time about sort of where we are, big picture on the remaining items. We approved so far the vernal pool ad and the traffic report. We talked about the additional cost sharing with the school department for additional funding. And at the last meeting, we authorized the test pits to move forward. So before this meeting, we met with a local contractor and discussed the process that we're going to use for moving forward with those test pits. I circulated to the committee what is Perkins Amendment 5. What that includes is both the design services associated with that test pit authorization, but it also includes the proposal for Perkins to authorize GZA to move forward with a geothermal test well. John, in speaking with the town, was able to determine that the town engineering budget could support an up to additional $20,000 to aid in that cost. And so adding in those various allotments, we end up at, we would currently have $64,216 remaining prior to the geothermal test well. And that does include $2,000 for the fire peer review that we just mentioned with Code Red. Mm-hmm. That was added in here. It also includes what we'll talk about in a moment, which is Thornton Tomasetti, the Mass Save technical advisor. So this would be, we went back to Mass Save and were able to determine exactly how The things that would move forward would work with their 50% reimbursement up to $10,000. So this includes the base services, which is $8,000 for schematic design, which they would pay $4,000 of. So the town's cost would be $4,000. We also discussed, I believe it's task 3, which is a plug load analysis, which will help Perkins in their energy modeling in terms of understanding electrical plug load uses and how the timing and scheduling of that affects the overall efficiency and EUI of the building. So that's something that they don't currently have within their scope and they thought would be valuable. Because of the 50% cost share and because we removed what was task 2, which was adding on the analysis of the mechanical system as well as the life cycle costs, pulling that out because that requires that Thornton Tomasetti develop their own energy model, so the cost is more substantial. It frees up more of that available $10,000 to contribute to the plug loads. So even though the plug load cost is $3,000, they're now sharing $1,500. So if we were only to move forward with those 2 items, the cost would be $5,500. Running all those numbers, you can see that we end up with $64,216 remaining prior to authorizing the geothermal test well. So by approving Amendment 5 with both the services for the test pits as well as the geothermal well, we would have $10,866 remaining that could be either held onto for other things that were coming up. I don't know the exact terms of the engineering money, so it could just only require a portion of that additional funding from the town engineering department, or we could examine other things like a hydrant flow test if the committee wished to move forward on any of those items that we've talked about. The $14,500 that would be required to do the system load analysis and life cycle cost analysis with Thornton Tomasetti doesn't seem as appropriate at this time, given that the committee made a decision at the last meeting to pursue the all geothermal. So it would really be a redundant energy model that would be checking the team's math. And I believe Thornton Tomasetti is already one of your consultants for some of the aspects of that.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get into discussion and eventual vote on this, the ask from the town for the additional $20,000 was specific to the need for that geothermal test well. So I'm not saying we couldn't use the money for something like a hydrant flow test might fit into the category of what the engineering department would also help us with, but I personally would be uncomfortable rerouting any of that money without checking back with them. So I think for purposes of what we're going to do tonight, we should just assume that that money that's coming from them makes up whatever difference we had. And then if we really feel strongly about it, we can go back to the town and ask if they would provide it for this. But I think, especially given that unfortunately we don't have the town manager or the select board representative here, I really think we couldn't make that assumption.
And currently the only thing that appears in here that changes, that modifies that approach is the $2,000 for the peer review for the fire department, which is something that's in question at the moment.
Okay. Questions, comments? Okay, so
I guess my question is, what is it, and you may be covering this later on timelines of everything, is there an expectation timeline on digging the well?
I wish I had a good answer. Skillings, who's going to be doing the well, I contacted GZA, who would manage that effort. They are swamped because there's a lot of geothermal wells being dug, and there's not very many people digging them. So they're trying to get me a schedule on it, but I don't have an answer to exactly when they would be able to do it.
But doesn't it have to be done before we vote on a final number at the end of August? Because that 1C is the backup, depending on how many wells that we do or don't need.
That's the hope. I just can't guarantee.
Yeah, I mean, that's not that far off, really.
No, yeah, so time is of the essence. The quicker we can get mobilized and do it, the better off we all will be. I mean, even if you had to take the conservative approach into town meeting, it would still be important to have that information before the design restarts in December, because then you can always tighten the overall design up. You can carry the more conservative design to town meeting, tighten it up at the start of December when you actually move forward, and parking lot that money kind of in a reserve contingency, you know, for other issues that may come up.
Is the actual well, is it similar to the well you have at your house? Casing, 500 feet deep? In other words, could we get a regular well driller and drill the shaft 500 feet deep, and then hire these monkeys to come test it to make sure it meets?
Well, it has a,
Because you can get those guys.
No, it's different. So it's,
Or it is different.
you bore the well and then you take a pipe, either a 4-pipe system or a 2-pipe system that is a loop, and
So
you
they have to
lower the
put that
pipe
down.
all the way down,
Yeah.
and then you grout it.
I see.
So it's,
Okay,
that's
so those, they're the only guys that can do that.
yeah, there's only, I think there's 3 who would do it.
I can see why it'd be hard to
There's
get
not
them.
too many
They're gonna
right now.
rig out, drilling 150 holes, they're gonna pick it up and move it to operating.
To do one.
You know, I could see how it would be a hassle.
Any other questions, comments, or anything? Okay, so you're seeking a motion to approve Perkins Amendment 5 as included in the meeting materials?
We might be figuring that out.
Sorry, I was asking about the Thornton Thomas City thing. Can you, your question was about the
So,
geothermal, sorry.
so we're looking for a motion to approve amendment number, project amendment number 5.
Amendment number 5, which includes the test pit that we talked about at the last meeting, plus this geothermal well.
Okay. So, seeking a motion to approve amendment number 5, which includes the test pit and the geothermal well drilling.
And what does that total up? I'm looking at the amendment now, but those two items equal,
I gotta do the math quick.
well, I think the 53,350 for the well.
It's,
Yeah, 53,350 plus the 25.
the proposal I wanna say is $2,035 with
Yeah,
markup.
it's 2,035 plus 53.
So 55-ish.
So 55,385.
Okay, thank you.
Is the added amount for this proposal.
Did you move?
I can move. Well, I think I take it. Not good.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Bill. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jaggeroot. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, so unanimous, 4-0.
Thank you. So to clarify for the committee, we didn't get a revised proposal from Thornton Tomasetti yet. So if we move forward with the plug loads and the base services, the authorization would be to engage them on a proposal that would include just task 1 and task 3, which is the base scope, as well as the base scope for schematic design, as well as the plug load analysis. I did confirm with both Mass Save and Thornton Tomasetti that those would be the values. The only reason that they would revisit it is if we engage them on task 2, because they have some baked-in costs for building the energy model that affect both the life cycle cost as well as the mechanical system analysis. So the 5,500 would be the correct amount that they would come back to us with in the revised proposal, if that's the option that the committee selects. The base that the committee could select would be to only do the schematic design portion of Mass Save's commitment, which would be $4,000 for the town, for a total cost of $8,000 with the Mass Save cost share. That would be the minimum required to enter into the Mass Save program, but the Mass Save program, should the project move forward, has substantial benefit to the town, as we outlined last week in our review of the mechanical system, and this is just a prerequisite for entering into that program. Should the project not move forward, it'd be sunk cost. If the project does move forward, there would be a small, also cost-shared amount for design development that would be baked into the larger project cost with all the other professional fees.
So in summary, at this point, we're suggesting moving forward with task 1 and task 3 for the 5,500, and we'll get the updated proposal if the committee is okay with us moving forward with task 1 and task 3.
Thoughts?
And just for reference, the task 3 is the only optional one. You've already signed the MOA, so you're obligated for task 1.
And, excuse me, but task 3 again, what's?
Just the plug loads. It helps to fine tune the overall design of the building.
And we did include in your meeting packet,
Working for a vote.
Eversource's description of what that involves. It's basically inventorying equipment that's they anticipate and the expected wattage and use schedules so that they have an understanding of how that essentially plugged in items will be utilized over the course of the day so that they can inform the energy model and your eventual EUI that the building will have.
So help us out with what you're looking for in a motion.
The motion would be, and let me type this as I go. The authorize Vertex to engage Mass Save and Thornton Tomasetti to move forward with task 1 and task 3 for schematic design in the Mass Save program.
Right, task 1 is schematic design, task 3 are the plug loads.
Yes.
Total amount of those two, $11,000.
Half of which the Mass Save will
Yes.
pay for and half of the town will pay for.
Will they pay for half the plug loads too?
Yes.
That's the revision that we don't have in hand. but
Gotcha.
Chris has
Okay.
received an email version that they would split, because we eliminated task, it's complicated,
Okay.
because we eliminated task 2, that freed up the money for task 3.
Gotcha,
essentially.
okay, so they will, so the motion is to approve engage Thornton Tomasetti for the work for task 1 schematic design and task 3 plug loads for a total cost of $11,000, half of which will be shared by Mass Save.
Correct.
Shared or reimbursed?
Shared.
I believe it's shared.
They pay and you pay separate. They get invoiced separately.
Would anyone be interested
So
in making
moved,
that
Mr.
motion?
Chairman.
Motion by Mike, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jack Root. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No? Unanimous? 4-0.
I do.
I just have a question
Seems to me this, unlike a lot of other things we spend money on, is an opportunity to save money in the long run. Am I wrong?
Absolutely, no, you're correct.
So this is kind of a no-brainer.
We like
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
The plug load analysis, is that something that affects the bore field sizing? Or is it not related?
Ultimately, it's related to how much it costs to run the building, which would relate to how many photovoltaics you need in the future to offset the cost to run your building. So it's fine tuning.
It also, the way that the Mass Save program works is that the option, so there's multiple tiers within the Mass Save program, and we entered on, I forget whether it's option 1 or tier 1, they have a specific name for it.
Path 1.
Path 1. Path 1 has you realizing a EUI of 25 or under, but that EUI is verified as part of the project. So to get your incentives, you have to prove out that you are at that level at the end of the project. By getting the plug loads now, it takes some question out of that analysis, so you can say, all right, we think we're going to use this. And so it builds that into the calculation so that you can better forecast for other decisions you'll have to make to ensure that you end up with that EUI of 25.
And without going down a deep rabbit hole, after you open the building up, what equipment is plugged into what outlets and what runs overnight affects that
Yes.
EUI. So, when the IT department does upgrades to the equipment, which is usually in the middle of the night, we have to be smart about which systems are plugged in to the 24/7 outlets versus the ones that shut off when the occupancy turns off for the building. And so there's an educating to the teachers about that too, that don't plug your laptop into this outlet because it'll turn off at midnight or whatever. And so that's how you fine tune the building and keep it below the
The
threshold.
phantom plug loads are an enormous user of electricity in the building.
Right, a printer running all kinds of things can just draw power.
Anything plugged in is using power, basically.
all the
So
time.
there aren't any financial incentives under 25 EUI, is that accurate? Or once you got to be 25 or below?
25 is the minimum
25 is the
or
program.
the max that you have to hit to get the largest rebate.
Yeah.
There remains other incentives if you get above 25, but they drop off substantially.
But there's no difference
Nothing
between
below.
20 and 25.
Correct.
Okay.
Less solar panels.
Less solar panels
Yeah.
and costing less to run the building, but not from a
Yeah.
rebate standpoint.
But nothing from a mass save standpoint.
But, well, yeah, but the solar panels are an option to begin with. That's not something we need to do to qualify for the best level of.
That's correct. That goes
okay.
back to whether your building is net zero or
Right.
net zero ready.
Yeah.
And so our building that we're talking about is net zero ready.
Yes.
Because we're not including the photovoltaics, but
Thank
to
you.
go the extra mile, there would be a PPA or whatever.
Yeah, so within the mass save program, 25 is the best that they'll reimburse you for. But outside of the mass save, there's always incentives to have using less energy in your overall building. Do you want to take this part?
Yeah, so, does everyone see the screen up there? So, we talked at the last meeting about when are decisions made, what are the important parts?
I can zoom in.
Yeah, that's perfect right there. So, last week we talked about the mechanical decision, which was a big one for the team. Tonight you saw presentations on exterior form and the finishes and the materials and the options and price gradation. We talked about updated site design. So we have 2 meetings scheduled in June. At the first meeting, scheduled on the 13th, we're going to talk about the traffic report, the feedback that comes out of that, and the recommendations that the traffic engineer has. We'd also be looking for a decision on the material finishes that you saw tonight on what to put in the pricing set, should you be ready to do that. We'll also talk about the finalization of the educational program. We presented a lot of that tonight, some of those nips and tucks that we've done and some of the tweaks to how the building is used inside and outside. So looking to just kind of crystallize that with the committee. And then there'll be an interior design presentation. We'll come back at the 27th and then really confirm what you want to see for the interiors, just like we did with the exterior today, kind of a 2-meeting cycle. And then you've already had the first of the 2-meeting cycle on the general contractor versus CM at risk. And so that's really, now that you have a better understanding of, is this building complex or not? Is the site complex or not? That's at which point we'll make the decision of how to price this project, whether it's a general contractor or a construction manager. So those are really the real fundamental decision points in the project, and all that will then go back into the skills machine of your design team, Perkins and their subconsultants, and they'll generate the pricing package in the middle of July. So that middle of July pricing package comes out on the 12th, and then we take 3 weeks to estimate that. I need to fine tune with John and Carol how we line up the votes of the other committees after your committee. So there's a bit of an asterisk on these dates in August. This committee will be meeting essentially every Tuesday, but when we take the vote and when the other 2 committees have their support votes is the part we still need to sort out. But essentially, we'll have updated numbers by the second week in August to send to the committee in advance of the meeting on the 15th, and then we present the reconciled estimates. We talk about those big picture financial decisions. Do we keep this aspect out? Do we change the materialities? Can we get rid of the roof balcony? Do we add this? All those decisions will kind of happen at that August 15th meeting. We'll then come back a week later, realize those changes, come to a final dollar amount that you're comfortable with on the 22nd. And that's when we're recommending that this committee votes the project scope and budget. So that's, what we think the overall schedule is. You'll know the ed program, and you'll know the size of the building, and you know the cost that you want to bring back to the taxpayers. We then get back in front of the school committee and select board, either at a joint meeting that night or a subsequent meeting somewhere between the 22nd and the 29th. And then on the 29th, this committee would meet again to then approve the project team to submit the package. And the package is due to the MSBA by August 31st. And then that sets off the negotiations with the MSBA, understanding the final reimbursement value that we bring back to town meeting. MSBA board will vote on October 25th. And then the town will have your town meeting and funding votes in November, December timeframe to be determined actual dates. So I wanted to put those big picture out there, but all the feedback that you've been giving at every meeting is vital, right? The designers are hearing you about being stewards of cost and to come back with options so you guys can give more realistic feedback. But if there's anything you think is missing or topics that we haven't covered, let us know. We can add that to the June meetings, or add another meeting in June, or add one in July. We were gonna, not on the schedule here, but on your calendars, I think we originally had a July 18th placeholder you probably have in your calendar. We were gonna shift that to the 25th. And on the 25th of July, we were gonna have a conversation, because we will give you a copy of the schematic design drawings from the July 12th submission. They're floor plans, they're not overly complex design documents, so all you should be able to review and understand it. But you can come back before the dollars are in hand. If you see things you don't understand why we did them, or you want to know more about it, we'll have that touch point in July. So it's not a whole gap of June to August. We will meet in July.
So the 18th is a good date.
18th, we're shifting to the 25th, because I wanted to give you more than 4 days to look at that package that comes out on the 12th. So I wanted to give you at least a week and a half. So, and that also gives the estimators time to look at it, and Chris and myself specifically time to look at it, so we can bring back things that we want to flush out for you guys to talk about.
So I guess my question is, looking at this calendar between August 15th and August 22nd, August 15th we'll get the costs. A week later we decide on what, or at the 15th, what's in, what's out. The 22nd we do the vote. Yet we only have one meeting between now and then where the community can share their input, and that's in a couple of weeks. Is it possible, is it normal, is it advised to have a community forum after we know the costs to get their input before we move ahead? That to me, that would be pretty important, once costs are known, for them to voice their opinion then, not in November or December.
Yeah, so excellent question. So in terms of community feedback is always welcome and important, right? The process that we've laid out here and that is followed in many towns is that you present the information as it becomes available, and not step out front with the pocketbook, because the people in the public are voting in isolation.
Yeah.
And they're not the ones that have the full picture. It's this body and the other bodies in town, the school committee and the select board, that are more engaged in the process and can kind of step back and understand that the ed program is the driver, and you're not looking in isolation of why are we spending $1 million on paving or $2 million on play space. You know, what are the drivers there? So we generally recommend that you present the topics to the public and not the individual costs, because as you saw tonight, it's complex, right? You amongst your committee will debate, you know, is it brick, is it CMU, is it metal panel? And a public forum is not the best suited venue to do that, because people are knee-jerk reacting to information that's presented, and they feel that's their only chance to say something. So I know it's a long-winded way of giving you an answer, but the intent is to present the design and look for feedback, and not necessarily price it per item so they can give cost feedback.
I mean, to be fair, they could attend these meetings that we're holding too, so maybe we encourage them to start coming to these last few meetings, because that's a chance for them to voice their opinion. I'm just worried, Mike started earlier tonight, that we get to there and they're going to say, whoa, 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 what's this all about? Yep. And so please come to these meetings if you have any concerns that we're not addressing verbally right now.
Absolutely, and you know, the email address exists as well. Information can go to John as a committee chair, and that can be distributed to the project team and the committee to flag issues that need resolution or need follow-up. And so, you know, a lot of outreach has been done, and we should continue on it. This will be a virtual one. We're hoping that did have better turnout than some of the prior in-person ones, so we're going to follow that model for the June 7th community forum, because we felt that had a better turnout, being at the convenience of people's touch versus having to get in a car and get a babysitter and drive. You can kind of listen along. So we're following that method here.
And my last question, comment is, you mentioned, first time I heard today was November, December. So it's been November, special town meeting. Who determines that date, and what's the process for finding that date?
Yeah, so there's a period of time
after the MSBA votes that we have to get local approval. I forget what it is.
It's like 90 days, yeah.
90 days?
Yeah, yeah.
Is it? Yeah, so, but we wouldn't.
Right, so it's somewhere
we wouldn't
between
wait
end of
that long.
January, but holidays.
What
get
we've
in the
been
middle.
talking to the town about is November, because I think it makes more sense than to get into December, et cetera. Beyond that, because you get holidays, it just becomes like early November, honestly, before you even think about getting in towards the Thanksgiving timeframe. I have spoken to Norman about needing to set a special town meeting date, but I will use this schedule just to put that in front of him again, because I know that that's a process, and now that we're past annual town meeting, we should be thinking about that. But yeah, I think for our purposes, the best thing to do would be somewhere in early November.
And you can, other towns, some, by nature, sometimes you vote before an MSBA board. The difference is you don't have the official stamp of the reimbursement dollar value, even though you know it, but the MSBA says they can't publish it unless they voted first. So you could vote any time after the submission, essentially, but we're recommending wait until after that vote on October 25th, and early November is perfect.
And I think that the other thing is recognizing that we would love more people to come to these meetings to give feedback, like we had the two people from Sustainable Green come and participate in the discussion around the HVAC and mechanical systems. Realistically, having you've done a lot of budgets, we've done all these projects and budgets. It's when we finalize that schematic design, that's when all of a sudden people are going to really start plugging into that number. And so then it's going to, where the forums I think are going to be really, really important are between August and that November special town meeting, because we're going to have to take everybody through the how we got here. And make sure that they understand what that is. So a lot of work to do.
I have one more comment. It's kind of echoing what Bill said at the start of this meeting. We have a lot of items on the agenda in June, traffic, interior finishing, things like that. It would help me at least, to know what percentage of the total cost we are talking about for each of these items. For example, in the last meeting, we knew we were dealing with about 10% of the total cost. And that helps us focus our discussions accordingly. We talked about landscaping today, but maybe landscaping doesn't move the needle that much from a cost perspective. So just knowing that, I think, would help our discussions, especially in June with so many items coming up for discussion.
Yeah.
We could probably, I think we can do that from a perspective of an average building. Like, I don't think we could do it exactly for this building,
Right, I
because we don't
understand.
have the cost estimate in front of us for this building. But we certainly could look at a similar project and say, well, the interiors would range between 5 and 8% or whatever it is.
Right.
And then you would have at least some range of what we're talking about.
Right.
I think
Well, I think
it's
the way
easier
you
for that
presented the
one.
exterior materials was really helpful in that regard.
Yeah, and that's
right?
just
So
a
we can
range.
just we know it's a range, but at least
Yeah.
we can sort of work within that range and say, okay, so we're talking about like some of the changes we said were like $500,000, or we know that's not exact, but it gives us at least sort of order of magnitude of what we're dealing
No,
with.
we agree.
don't want to be cutting shrubs and find out that it's it's going to save us like $200.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think from the interiors, we can certainly follow through on that, and I think tonight's presentation was a great example of that. Traffic is a little different because it's, first of all, they're recommendations, and you as a committee, you can take or reject those, and there are trade-offs of those accepting and rejecting of those decisions. And because you're so deep on the site, a lot of that stuff is just baked into the overall design because of where you're driving your roadway and how you're accessing the site, because of the geometry of it.
Okay. Do we have anything else?
I think just kind of getting back to the discussion that you were saying, Bill and John, in terms of trying to get public engagement, because people won't come to the meetings and chances are they don't watch, just anything that, residents can do to kind of build the following helps to get those questions now even.
Yeah.
So.
And the flyer is out, John, for the public forum, so we should get that out there with the QR code, get it posted on Facebook and all other mediums
Get
that
it
have worked
posted
to
in some
date,
of the coffee shops and stuff.
Right, and then we put a QR code on it this time, so anybody at the coffee shop can scan it or take a picture of it and be able to scan it so they can get a link to it.
Awesome. All right. Well, if there is nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Bill, second by Mike. All in favor? Aye. It's unanimous, and so we are adjourned at 8:10 PM. Thank you, HCAM, for broadcasting, and thank you, everyone. Have a good night.